And we are live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the stream. I hope you're doing well. You're having a nice beginning of the week. And I say welcome to you back on the channel for another interview with a member of the European Parliament. Tonight we will discuss with MEP Catharina Rinzema from the Renew Europe group, so on the center of European politics. She's been a Dutch MEP since 2022. It's her first mandate. It's the very first year in the European Parliament. She is 37 years old and she's a member of the Committee on International Trade, and she's a substitute on the Committee on Internal Market and Consumer Protection. And to give you a brief idea, within this committee, she works mostly on foreign subsidies and trade agreements, and the question of children's rights, which is a pretty hot topic these days, but we're going to discuss that during the interview, I'm sure. But before we start our conversation, as usual, a brief reminder of the rules for anyone who would be new with us tonight. So our guest will be with us for 45 minutes. After that, she has to go because I have to remind that it's a plenary week, so Ms. Rinzema is talking to us from Strasbourg, which means like it's a very busy week for her, and especially grateful that she takes the time to answer our questions tonight. So 45 minutes, then she go work or enjoy a bit the Strasbourg evening, and you will be stuck with me for another 30 minutes where we will debrief a bit your impression of the interview, discuss whatever additional question that you may have, provide any additional explanations, this kind of thing. As usual, I have prepared my own questions, and you can, of course, suggest your own question in the chat. It's there for that. I will keep an eye on it. But as usual, feel free to participate, but do that without spamming and while staying civil. And, of course, we are on the channel talking about European politics, so we're not going to discuss national politics unless it's related to European politics. So keep that in mind when asking or suggesting your questions. And on this note, I think we're good to go. So let's start our conversation with MEP Rinzema. Good evening, Catharina Rinzema. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. So you heard me do my little introduction where I was introducing you and all that. Is there anything that I missed that you would like to add before we dive in?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Clinton. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and hello to everyone who's listening. So I'm from the Netherlands. I hope a lot of you have already visited this beautiful country. There's enough to see. I think in the introduction I've not yet said that I'm also a mother. So I have a 3-year-old at home, which I think also gives me a very extra dimension how to look to life, and also how to look into the future. What do we want for the future generation? So that's just something to add on the side. And also, I must say that this is, of course, the football season, and my country is playing tonight. So if you hear something in the background, this could be some of the football noise of colleagues.
Well, actually, someone on Twitter was asking, among your priorities, she's not watching the football match. So I think there's already not controversy, but people say, oh, well, you're giving priority to a Twitch interview over football. So I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, well, the game started a little bit earlier, so of course we've tried to be streaming it on the side. But as you know, it's plenary week, so that also means that we have to work it. That's what people expect from us. So, but of course, I'm very happy that the Dutch soccer team is performing well.
All right. Well, now let's dive into it. So you've been an MEP since January this year, so it's your very first year. But before coming in Parliament, how and why did you go into politics? What was the spark for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would like to explain a little bit about my background. So my father, he is a Protestant minister. So in the Netherlands, you have, of course, both Catholic people and Protestant people. So my father is like a priest, but then for a Protestant church. Both my grandfathers were, and great-grandfather. So I think I've been brought up really with the idea that you have to try to serve and to see what is the greater good that I can contribute to. So I hope also for all the people who are listening, I really hope that if you make decisions in life, what to study or where to work, that you really think, okay, how can I make a difference in line with my values? For me, I always wanted to be into politics. And I think the moment that it really sparked was in the election when finally Donald Trump won. There were so many women in the US from both the Republican and the Democratic side saying, wait a minute, if this guy is able to get elected, I should raise my hand. And that's when I also thought, okay, now it's time for me really to enter politics.
And so now you're an MEP. You've been in office for a bit less than a year. So 1 year on, what's your take on being an MEP? You enjoyed the experience? Are there things that were proved easier than you anticipated, more complicated than you anticipated?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So maybe I'll start a little bit with the campaign. So what I did during the campaign is that I really already in advance, I approached two candidates from other political parties, two female candidates. And why did I do that? Because I really think when it comes to European politics that we have to work together. So people told me in the Netherlands, that's really unusual that you did that you were already campaigning with women from other political parties. But I think actually the fact that they agreed to campaign together with me, and we did a big roadshow in the Netherlands, and we were in a lot of media, we were talking to first-time voters, it really learned me how you can work together with people, maybe from a different view, different background. It doesn't matter, because in the European Parliament, you need to find majorities. And you also need to see, if you have differences, how to overcome this. So that's one thing about the campaign. Then my first impressions as MEP, people used to tell me, oh, Brussels is full of gray people in gray suits with gray hair and gray ideas. And luckily, it didn't turn out to be like that at all. So a lot of fresh ideas, a lot of young, good people with good energy. So that was my first impression.
And so now you're in Parliament, your primary committee is the Inter committee, so the Trade Committee. Trade is a very, let's say, disputed policy area, especially over the past decade, and we see more and more tension between, on the one end, the EU, and on the other end, member states who want to ensure, notably, that their national parliaments have a veto on future trade agreements. So is this willingness to have national parliament and even regional parliaments have a veto over trade, is it justified for you, or is it in a way the death of the exclusive competence that the EU has on trade agreements?
Well, I would say, coming from the Netherlands, you know our history. Like, we are a small country, we're very dependent on trade. And it's also the reason why we've been very successful as a small country. So we realize that the dependency as a country comes from the fact that you need one another. And when it comes to trade, the Netherlands and also my political party, the VVD, have always been very pro-trade and also pro-trade agreements. And if the listeners remember, we've had the issue around the trade deal with Canada. And of course, we've also had the issue on the trade deal with the United States, TTIP. And I think what we have learned from that is that we need much better dialogue with the people and with our citizens about what is important about trade agreements. I will be honest with you, I'm very much in favor of trade agreements. I think they could be even more ambitious. So what I've been doing in Parliament since I started the beginning of this year is really being an advocate of free trade agreements. Why would I do that? I think also because you can see with the current war in Ukraine and also the situation with China and the huge tensions between China and the US, that we as the EU must stay united. We must be one single market. We have a lot to offer to other trade partners, but we need to do more. And I must say, the fact that in only 3 years of this mandate, the EU has been able to sign one trade agreement with New Zealand, which is a great partner, but it's just a start. It makes me even more ambitious. So if you say, what are your ambitions as MEP or as VVD? It would be to encourage to have signed much more trade agreements this mandate. And then we're talking about Australia, Chile, Mexico, and of course, Mercosur under the right conditions.
You said that you wanted a more ambitious trade agreements, and that's an idea that we find on both sides of, let's say politically, because those who oppose CETA, those who oppose the New Zealand agreement, the Mercosur agreement, they say, oh no, we're not anti-trade, we just want better trade, we want them to be better than they are. So what does it mean exactly for you, like better trade agreements? What are we talking about?
Ambitious trade agreements is really that we are able to sign these agreements. And my worry is, and this is also the concern of the VVD, that if we want to use trade agreements also for a lot of other things that are not supposed to be in the trade agreements, that we will not be able to ratify it anymore. So what I've seen within the parliament, as you have already explained, there are really different groups and different standpoints of whether we should protect our own markets. Some would even say this is protectionism or not. I think what you see now in America with the Buy American Act and also with the Inflation Reduction Act, that there's a very strong signal coming from the US that they are protecting their own interests. I think is we as EU would not then be united to say what we want on one front for trade agreements, but we have different member states all negotiating their own little interest. It will not make us as EU, as one trade bloc, reliable anymore. So if you ask me really what should ambitious trade agreements be about, it should really be about trade.
And so you mentioned it already. You made the reference to TTIP, so the now defunct EU-US trade agreement that never saw the light of day, notably because of protests and then the election of Donald Trump. But recently, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has pitched the idea of renewing TTIP discussions, notably in reaction to the US Inflation Reduction Act, which we'll discuss a bit after. But what is your opinion on a potential renewal of the TTIP discussion? Is it something that indeed should be on the agenda, or we should move on from TTIP and another format should be imagined?
Well, I'm someone who really looks into the future, but of course you have to understand the past. So I realize the work that all has been done already in the TTIP, but I think, as Margrethe Vestager said, if something has been too long in the freezer, you should not try to eat it anymore. So I think that's a phrase I understand very well when it comes to TTIP. So what I would like to draw the attention to for the audience is the TTC. This is the Tech and Trade Council. What is this? This is in fact 10 working groups between the EU and the US to see where we can find mutual agreement. I think that's now the model that we're trying to work on. I'm going to Washington next week. This will also be on the agenda, but so far I've not been very impressed by the current achievements. So we as VVD and also as Renew Europe are really looking now and asking, okay, come on, we don't have a lot of time left. In 2024, there will be elections in the US. Of course, we also will have elections here, so time is running. So let's look at the TTC and make it robust and concrete.
And so, since we're talking about the TTC, you just mentioned that you find the current result a bit disappointing, or at least not as good as they could be. How do you explain the fact that the TTC is not delivering as much as one could hope?
Well, that's a good question. I think the fact that you have 10 working groups maybe is not so helpful. I think that if you look at the model of the TTC that the EU and India now are looking into, it will only be four working groups. So they will have a much better focus. So that's one thing. I think 10 working groups might not be helpful. On the other hand, the groundwork of the TTC have really helped in the beginning with the war of Ukraine to set a collaboration between the EU and the US when it came to the sanctions, and especially to the export controls. So I don't want to be too pessimistic, because a lot of people from the inside have told me that because of the trust and because of already the work that had been done in this TTC, it was possible to move very quickly when it came to the position of sanctions, both from the US side and the EU side. But then, I don't know, TTIP is over. It's in the freezer, we're not going to eat it anymore. TTC was the buzzword when I started. Okay, I started late January. We're now here in November, almost hitting December. What's going to happen? The fact that we don't know is not a good sign. And maybe also I should add to it, If you look really from a constitutional point of view, in the Treaty of Lisbon, there was no such model as a TTC. So it's the question: is this a model we want to have? Yes or no? And where will it leave Parliament?
And final question when it comes to trade. So your political group is the Renew Europe, and when it comes to trade, depending on who you talk to in Renew, sometimes there are different perspectives on trade. Like you're saying very clearly that you are in favor of trade agreements, you want more trade agreements. But when we talk to other MEPs from Renew, for instance, from top of mind, I'm thinking about your French colleague Marie-Pierre Védrenne. She's pushing. She said, "Yeah, okay, we need trade," but she's also pushing for another view of trade, which some are saying would be more akin to protectionism. So, how do you reconcile, let's say, two different visions of trade that could conflict with each other?
Yeah, that's a good question. She's a very dear colleague. We work very closely together. And of course, I understand that historically speaking, the French and the Dutch, of course, they come from different backgrounds. And also they have perhaps different interests to defend. So within Renew Europe, we have quite big debates about it. It will not come as a surprise that for us as the Netherlands, we are often very much in line with the like-minded, like the Scandinavians, the Nordics, the people, the Danish, the Germans. And often we need more conversation with the French to find a common solution. I don't think it's wrong to have a different standpoint. The fact is though that both me and Marie-Pierre, we see that there's an importance for the FTA. So it comes more to the details, and that's also when we're talking about Mercosur. I really realized for the French this is a very delicate topic. And I think also being an effective politician means that you listen very carefully when the concerns are addressed, and also see in a respectful way how you can then find a compromise. As you know, you've been working in the EU far longer than I have. It's all about the details and the compromise.
So let's switch to something completely different from trade, which is your other committee, IMCO, and something that is of particular interest to you, which is children's rights. It's something that is not usually on the radar of people. When people think about the EU, they don't really think about children's rights. So what is the added value of the EU when it comes to children's rights?
Yeah, well, let's start for me from the beginning. When I was running for elections, I turned out to be pregnant, and especially during the last couple of weeks of the election, I would be 7 months pregnant, so very visibly pregnant. And so whenever I was campaigning, the first question that people would talk about was about children and what kind of future they wanted to have for their children, whether this was about education, healthcare, climate, safety, all these things. So I realized if I will get elected, this is really something, the story must continue. So when I got elected finally, I made a promise to my voters to say, listen, you voted for me because you think I can help you feel safe in your country and in Europe, but also because you give me a special responsibility for your children. So what did I do? I came into Parliament, I talked with a lot of people, and then finally I understood there was a position free as a vice chair in the Children's Rights Intergroup. As you know, there are many intergroups, and what I think is extraordinary about this intergroup is that we have more than 130 members who really look at every piece of legislation coming from the Commission and to see it from the angle of the children's rights. Why is it important? Because the children's rights, of course, they are in the UN conventions. They are in the Treaty of Lanzarote. But often when we think about the EU, we're talking about a lot of technical files, bureaucratic, and the perspective from the children, because they don't have a seat at the table, is often missed. But let's look at it from an IMCO perspective. If you talk about product safety, it also means you want that it's suitable and safe for children. If you talk about online gaming, you have to also think about the perspective from children. And we can talk about many subjects, whether this is food or products, where I think it's important that we talk about children.
since we're talking about children, one topic that is very controversial these days in the parliament is around the so-called Sesame regulation. So the Sesame regulation, it's a proposal from the commission to improve or let's say put obligations on messaging apps, for instance, to track down and remove images of sexual abuse on children. And it's very controversial. We see on the one hand privacy activists, to an extent fighting children's rights activists because they stand on different things. Some are saying that the regulation is going too far. The other are saying that it's not. So where do you stand in this debate?
Well, when I entered politics, I met with a guy. His name is Marcel Jeninga. He's from a Dutch foundation called Stop Child Abuse. And he told me about a pedophile handbook. I said to him, what do you mean? What is that? He said, on the dark web, but also on the internet, there are thousands and thousands of pages circulating how to groom, how to molest, how to abuse children. So it's like a masterclass that you can take, like a course, how to do this with tips and tricks. And he showed it to me, and of course it was sickening, because it really tells you training schemes, it tells you where children are, how you could abuse the children, with which part of your hand not to leave traces of DNA. So it's really explicit. And you can imagine, as a mother and as a politician, I immediately thought I have to do something. So I said, what can we do? He told me that by his efforts of his NGO, he went to Germany all the way up to the highest court, and he succeeded to make sure now that written manuals like this are forbidden by law. And why is this special? It is special because you could also say they are just words, so it's written, it's no images, and we have freedom of speech in Germany, in the Netherlands, in the EU. So this is also a fundamental right. And I think also that's where it comes in the whole CSAM debate. Do you want to have a good balance between the well-being of children and young people and all of us? Security, innovation, privacy? Yes, I think we want that. But somehow now the debate is really going into two camps. It's very much from one side, the privacy people who are saying, if this part of legislation will go through, we will live in a total surveillance state. It will be Big Brother. And then, of course, you have the children's rights groups who say, if we do not tackle this, the whole child sexual exploitation online, especially after COVID, will be so enormous, we don't have any legislation to tackle. So I don't know to what extent you want to go into details now, because you told me also to keep the answers a bit short. So let's see.
Well, here the main criticism that we hear from the privacy activists against them is saying, oh, but if you start putting a weakness in the end-to-end encryption to find sexual abuses, then you open the way for other kind of uses which might not be legal. Like you could facilitate the work of hackers, of malware, of even government surveillance, because you will have weakened the end-to-end encryption. So what's your, let's say, answer to this technical, let's say, argument?
Yes. So what you can see is when it comes to end-to-end encryption, there are a lot of myths, and a lot of people do not have enough technical details or technical background to really be able to assess it. So what I've done is, because from the IMCO point of view, I will be taking on this file. It will also be dealt with in Libe. This is a lot of inside information, maybe for people who don't work in the EU bubble. So what we've done, we've been talking for the last couple of months, we've been talking with the industry, with all the tech companies, we've been talking with the privacy, and also with the technological expert. And what you see from the proposal of the Commission is that they very much state that it is a technology neutral type of legislation. And I have been questioning, what does that mean? Because when you say it's technology neutral, will it mean that you give an incentive to the tech companies to start innovating, to start preparing for the right kind of tools, technological tools to do it, or not? From a privacy point of view, I would say it would be very dangerous to have a solution where you need to break the end-to-end encryption. So when I talked with the Commission, I also raised this. I said to them, it will not be possible for a lot of countries like my country, the Netherlands. It's the same for Austria. It's the same for Germany. If the solution in the end would be a technological situation where you are a solution where you are breaking the end-to-end encryption. So and to that extent, I agree. I think it's very valuable that we have an end-to-end encryption. This is an aspect we should not throw away. So the big question now, which is still unclear in the proposal, is from a technological point of view, from a detailed point of view, how then would this work?
So I understand that you're not saying that the end-to-end encryption should be threatened by the regulation. So it's a matter of finding a solution that ensure end-to-end encryption. There was someone in the chat asking, like, on the general debate on end-to-end encryption, there are some initiatives in some countries trying to reduce by law the strength of encryption. For instance, for law enforcement issues, we've seen the whole debate on whether Apple should give Ashevik access to law enforcement, etc. So, what do you think about this kind of legislative initiative to try to legally weaken encryption?
Well, you see, indeed, there's a conflict of ground rights here, where I've been going to Europol 2 weeks ago to say, okay, listen, what would you really need to have an effective way of working? They've not mentioned the fact that they want to break the end-to-end encryption. They have said that they see a lot of possibilities in AI advanced tools where there's no legislation at the moment that they are able to use. So this is something that I think we as co-legislators should look more into. And the problem is, and I think that's why it's also great that your audience is asking the more detailed questions, that a lot of co-legislators are not technological savvy. So when it comes to really the details on a technical level, often we are left a little bit in the camps that we are pushed or that we are pulled into one camp or another camp. What I hope finally, as also for this CSAM proposal, is that what I said in the beginning, that it will have a good balance between the children's well-being, the privacy, security, and the innovation aspect. But we have to start yet. So we are receiving a lot of position papers from a 360-degree position, I would say. So it will be an interesting puzzle.
You will be the rapporteur in IMCO or shadow?
Shadow. I will shadow.
Shadow, okay.
But I find it, firstly, maybe this is because I'm new, I don't think that really will make a difference.
No,
because I do think that you can be, what I've done, I hosted with ELF. I'm a board member of the European Liberal Forum. So I've been hosting events there where I've invited the industry, privacy partners, children's rights organizations. And I'm doing a lot of these kind of things because I think it doesn't really matter what kind of title you have in the European Parliament.
Of course.
You have convening power. And that's also something I want to say to the audience, like really approach me, approach my colleagues. If you want to have something put higher up on the agenda, or if you want like to have smart solution to certain things, you don't always need to be the rapporteur to be effective.
Let's switch again to our topic. Another body in which you are involved is the EU-UK delegation. So the parliamentary delegation that is trying to rebuild links between the European Parliament and the UK Parliament. And over the past few days, we've seen the new UK Prime Minister trying to fight against rumors that the government would be supporting of a Swiss-style relationship with the EU. What do you think of a possibility of a Swiss-like infrastructure to cover the relationship with the UK? Is it something that is it feasible? Is it unthinkable? Or where do you stand, theoretically speaking?
Theoretically speaking, so as you know, the Dutch and the British have always been very close friends. So I must say that we dearly miss our British colleagues. Having that said, in 2016, they have chosen for Brexit. and they have done so in a quite convincingly manner. However, the outcome of the Brexit has been quite messy and ugly, as you have seen in huge changes in politics when it comes to the leadership in the UK. So what we've done in the UK delegation, I'm working a lot with Nathalie Loiseau also on this from the Renew side, and my colleague from Ireland, Barry Andrews. What we have been doing, we have been trying to re-engage with our counterparts, and this was not easy. So since Brexit, there had not been a lot of exchange. And for the first time, there's been now a delegation. This was November 7th, 8th to London to meet again with the counterparts. And I must say that the atmosphere has really changed with this current prime minister. So what we can see now is really a more maybe positive atmosphere, also when it comes to our Irish colleagues. But at the same time, you always have to be cautious. So what we are also doing now, we're in the midst of a trilogue. I'm together with Nathalie Loiseau and Charles Goerens from Luxembourg. We are in the trilogue on behalf of Renew to say, what if the Brexit, what if UK will not hold itself to the agreement that we negotiated with Brexit? What do we have in place if they don't hold these lines? And there, I will be honest with you, we are being quite firm that we cannot have an agreement without repercussions if you withdraw yourself. So the model that the UK is now looking into, I mean, I understand the economy has been hit severely, and the UK is not in a great shape at the moment. So I understand that they're looking for new models, but my role is really to protect the Dutch and the EU interests. So I'm looking at it from that angle.
Okay. And do you think that there is any hope to finally put to rest the divisions when it comes to the Northern Irish Protocol, or are we doomed to argue with the British government over that for decades?
Well, my first job was at Google European headquarters in Dublin in Ireland. So I've lived a while in Ireland, and I've grown very fond of the Irish people. It is a very complex history that I think doesn't deserve another chapter of being, again, a complex chapter. So we have to stay realistic. Of course, it has not looked very pretty the last couple of years. Let's see. The EU, I think there's a different wind now in the EU, not only when it comes to the UK, but also when it comes to China, of course, towards Russia, but even towards the US. I feel, and I just started last January, that there's a more geopolitical atmosphere in Brussels, that we have really been forced also after February 24 with the invasion to stop only talking about possible situations, but that we really had to act on the spot.
Let's talk now about your country, the Netherlands. So Dutch people always had a complicated relationship with the EU. You remember, we all remember the referendum in 2005, where the Dutch and the French voted against the so-called constitutional treaty. Since we talked about Ukraine, we also remember that in 2016, the Netherlands, while being holding the EU presidency, voted by referendum against the EU-Ukraine association agreement, which is a bit odd now that we look at it from today's perspective. So, how do you explain this more difficult relationship, or more like a skeptical relationship that Dutch have with the EU?
Well, if we go back a little bit longer in history, you know that the Netherlands is one of the founding partners. So in having that said, I think we also should realize that the Netherlands has always been very much looking towards neighbors, looking outwards. As I said before, we are a very small country, very dependent on trade. So let me first start by saying we are one of the founding fathers and mothers of the EU. Okay. But then, going fast forward, as you said, in 2005, like France, we voted against the European Constitution. Why did we do it? I think and that's also where I would say that have been all being guilty. I think that all political parties and also the Dutch government really didn't dare to advocate for the upside of being an active member in the EU. And I think you've seen a little bit the same with the British government when it came to the Brexit referendum. There was a sort of reluctance to be really much advocating in favor of. It's not very much in the Dutch nature of to tell other people what they should be doing, because in the nature of a Dutch person, it's kind of anarchistic. He or she doesn't want to be told what to do. But as a result of that, a lot of people were not very clear of what is the potential benefit or upside of being in the EU. And this was only worsened by a lot of the crises that we've had, whether this was the financial crisis or the migration crisis. What changed it? I think now the atmosphere has changed because of also Brexit. I think, as I said to you before, the Dutch and the British have always been very close friends, and it was a big shock that the Brits voted to get out. And also what we saw afterwards, that it was really hitting their economy and also the social cohesion. So now if you would go to the Netherlands, to the streets, and to ask people, would you be in favor of an exit? So Netherlands leaving the EU, people would say no. Another reason why they would say no is because of what happened in Ukraine. So yes, you are right. There was a referendum about part of association agreement with Ukraine, which I think was misused or abused by certain movements in society, more populistic, trying to erode our democratic institutions, and not so much concerned about the faith of and the state of Ukraine. So I'm not sure if we should relate these two to each other, but the Dutch have seen what happened after President Putin invaded Ukraine, and they've also realized that this is our own backyard, and that war is back in Europe. So now the support for the EU, luckily, is higher, but it is still with the angle: where is it actually useful? What are we making for laws in the EU? Are these laws keeping me safe, making my life better? If not, please refrain yourself, EU.
And over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of talk about reforming the EU, doing a potentially treaty changes to upgrade a bit the EU, because the last time we had a treaty was in 2009 with the Lisbon Treaty. So if you could change anything in the way the EU works, like you snap your fingers and it's done, what would you change and why?
I would say we need better communication of in which part of the legislative train some pieces of legislation are. What I see is often that a lot of companies, NGOs, civil society, they lobby or they come with their own interest to the national parliaments. So I have also worked in The Hague, in the Dutch parliament. A lot of time you have meetings with people and you tell them, but you have to go to Brussels. Go there. And then they say, yeah, but it's a black box. I don't know to find my way. I don't know where a part of legislation would be. And then I always tell people, but you can go to the perm rep, you can go to the commission. There are people working in the commission very hard and very dedicated who are open for your arguments. And they want to talk with you and they want to listen to you. So if I could change one thing, it would be much better communication about where legislative files, where they are, and how people can respond to them and be more involved in the process. That's one thing. Secondly, I would like to see much more young people interested in European politics. When I was running as a candidate, as I told you before, I sought collaboration with two other young women because I said we need a much more young, diverse Parliament and EU, which is reflecting also our society. And it really hurts me that when it comes to Brexit, but also when Trump was elected, that it was because the young people didn't vote that there was this outcome of like they were. So I would really want to engage also much more young people.
And speaking of young people, then how do you think the EU should do, our British should do to get young people involved, get them interested in the EU, this thing that is looking so far from where they are, very complicated, very different from sometimes their national political system. So how do we get them hooked, let's say, to the EU and EU politics?
Sure. Well, there are, of course, many options. I hope a lot of people would come here to Brussels or to Strasbourg, but that's just maybe a day or a week, or that's an internship. So I think when it comes to outreach, there would be much more possible via the schools, already primary schools, high schools, universities, but also let's use technology. How is it possible that we are so connected with one another via great apps and via social media, and at one hand, so the distance is shorter than ever, and on the other hand, people still feel a lot of distance. So that's also something that I feel responsible, being a young MEP, how to have more outreach. And I think it's traveling a lot back to your country. So I'm from the Netherlands, so travel a lot, but also wherever you are, try to tell people why EU matters and where we work on solutions that help their life. And I think that's also collective responsibility for the people who are visiting Brussels, whether these are ministers or prime ministers. Tell to the people on national television and online where the EU can actually help. There are a lot of things maybe that can be better about the EU, but we need a new narrative how your home country, in my case the Netherlands, is functioning better, or is more robust in keeping people safe because of the EU.
All right, very clear. And looking at the time, I guess we're arriving at the end. Final question, the usual one. Where do you stand on the debates about federal Europe? Are you in favor? Are you against? Are you on the fence? Or for you, it's not a real debate? What's your take? What is your take?
I don't think it's a debate that serves the people back home. Like when I talk with people, they tell me about their problems now that they have, the worries they have about the high gas prices or the energy prices, or that they are not able to buy a small apartment or a house. And if I would then say as a response, well, actually, shall I tell you whether I'm a federalist, yes or no? I don't think that will help their problems. So for me, it's really about thinking, okay, what needs to be done on national level, whether this is on healthcare, if this is on taxes, on finances, and where can we improve people's life if we do it on EU level. And let me be very clear, for the VVD, it's very much about subsidiarity. So we would not say that we are in favor of these political theoretical structures which do not help people in their daily lives. They look at us, and I know there's already low trust in politicians and in institutions, and they just want us to fix things. So we have to be very clear. What can we fix on national level? What can we fix on EU level? But it should really be about helping people's lives get better.
All right, very clear. So thank you very much, Catharina Rinzema, for answering our question. Before you go, is there, if people have to remember one message from you from tonight, what would be your message to them?
My message is really engage yourself, whether this is via a political party or an NGO, it doesn't really matter. But really, I don't believe that we can afford to be indifferent at this moment. There's so many causes you could take on, and find that one thing where you are passionate about, where you really feel that your inner voice is speaking, and then engage yourself. Don't do it alone. It's not fun, and also it's not that effective, but really make sure that you engage with something that speaks from your heart and then your mind, and then you can really make sure that you further your mission here in this world.
Well, very clear. So thank you again, chat. Make sure to thank Catharina Rinzema for her time and her answers. You can follow her on Twitter. You see the @ just below a video feed. But stay, we're going to do the debriefing in a second. Miss Rinzema, thank you again, and I wish you a very good evening in Strasbourg. Hopefully you will have enjoyed your experience on Twitch, and you'll come back at a later stage. Who knows, before the 2024.
I would love that. It's been a big honor. I would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay, bye.
All right, chat. Let's do the debriefing. Let me put my camera on and meeting. Where is the camera? Webcam. You are. Tick, tick, tick. Webcam. Yay. Hi, chat. So, shorter interview than usual. It was 45 minutes, but it's Strasbourg, so MEPs are very busy. So I agreed to do something a bit shorter. 45 minutes. It still allows to cover a lot of subject and have an interesting discussion. But yeah, on the other end, means that we have more time to discuss. So it's a positive. I have my list of topics that we discussed. Of course, if you have questions, if you have things that you want me to discuss or whatever, go in the chat and let me know. Of course, let me know what you thought about the interview in the chat. It's always useful for me to know. But otherwise, I'm going to dive in my little topics there. So something that she mentioned very early in the interview was like, oh yeah, Brussels and the Parliament is often described as a grey city with grey people, grey hair, and grey ideas. And she said, oh yeah, but in 2019 actually there was a lot of change. It's not grey people with grey ideas and no hair and nothing new. There was a lot of change. It's true in the sense that in 2019, so when there was the last EU elections, there was a huge renewal of the parliament. About 60% of the MEPs who are now in the parliament, so 60% of the MEPs who were elected in 2019, are people who were not in parliament before. So it's 60% renewal of the parliament, which is huge. I don't recall the exact rate of renewal in 2014, but I think it was closer to 30 or 40% maximum. Here, over half of the MEPs moved away, and it's a lot of new younger MEPs that arrived in the parliament. So it creates a lot of course, discussions, new idea, and all that. So it's a very different parliament than what we used to have in 2014 and all that. A very different parliament from the one I knew, because I worked there 2013 to 2019, so it's a very different parliament from back when I was there as an assistant. Just having a sip of water. Stay hydrated. What else do I have on my piece of paper? Yeah, we had discussion about trade. Trade, very important topic in the EU, because Europe has a so-called exclusive competence. So when you're talking about trade agreements, only the EU has the power to conclude a trade agreement. So if you want a trade agreement with Canada, with New Zealand, or whatever, only the EU can negotiate that deal and decide on that deal. It's not France, it's not the Netherlands who can decide, okay, I'm going to have a trade deal with that or that country. Now, everything is done at EU level for a simple reason, is because we have a single market. So that means that people can move freely across the European Union. So of course, if you have a single market, that means that the external border of that market are European, and so that means that regulating what can enter the market or not, the European-wide market has to be decided at a European level. Hence, why the trade competence is at EU level and in an exclusive manner. Even if that is something that is not contested, but very heavily discussed, because you have all the debates about the legitimacy of trade agreements, and we've seen that particularly since the debates on TTIP. So TTIP is the now dead project of trade agreement between the EU and the US. We've seen that with CETA, so the trade agreement with Canada and the EU. We are seeing that right now with Mercosur, so the project of trade agreement between the EU and Mercosur. So Mercosur is like this regional organization in South America. So think about it like a very early version of the EU, but in South America, basically, to keep it simple. But bottom line is, there is a lot of discussion, a lot of controversy around this trade agreement, because people don't like. Well, people. When you're talking about trade in the public opinion, they're not very keen on it because they see they are being pitched as seen as a threat in terms of environment, a threat to agriculture, health, and all that. So it's very controversial, and there's a lot of pushback against these trade agreements. And on the other end, there's been like a push. Well, there's an idea that's a bit how can I say it? MEPs are coming back a bit from it because at some point there was this idea of the new generation trade agreement. So trade agreements, you had initially things that are pure trade, like how much ton of beef do enter this the European market, what are the custom rates, etc. So pure trade thing. And then as time progressed, there was this idea, okay, we need to have new next generation trade agreements, which starting to include things about investment, things about regulation, in the sense that, okay, we have trade, but then if we want things to work well, we need to try to make sure that our regulations are compatible with each other. So there is this idea of a regulatory discussion between the two space, and so that was one of the cornerstones of this so-called new next generation trade deal. But one consequences of this new generation trade deals was that since you were going outside the pure trade, you were coming into the realm of what was called mixed agreements, meaning that in one trade deal you have one part that is trade, so pure EU competence, so only the Commission, only the European Parliament, only the Council have a say in it, meaning that to have a trade agreement on pure trade to be agreed, you need, of course, the Commission does negotiation, but then you only need the Parliament and the Council to say, okay, you don't need anyone else. And then in mixed agreement, you have this trade part, and then you have all the extra stuff. And this extra stuff needs extra votes in favor, in the sense that it's not only the Parliament, it's not the European Parliament, it's not only the Council who needs to agree to it, it's also all the national and regional parliaments. And that's what happened with CETA. When CETA was concluded and it went through the ratification process, so all the institutions confirming that they agreed to that deal and that they wanted to apply, European Parliament voted in favor, Council voted in favor, and then it went to the regional and national parliament. And something very unexpected happened, is that you had the regional parliament of Wallonia. Wallonia is the French-speaking region of Belgium, so southern Belgium, so it's a regional parliament. They refused to approve CETA, and it created a big crisis because suddenly you had one region that was vetoing the big trade agreement with Canada. So it created a huge mess that needed to be corrected with additional a protocol to clarify things and try to claw back, let's say, the approval of the Walloon Parliament. But to this day, a number of parliaments still haven't ratified CETA, meaning that for now, CETA, so the trade agreement with Canada, is applying because it's provisionally applying, meaning that you have a clause that says, okay, once you have, I don't remember the exact number, if it's like, let's say 15 parliament or 15 parliaments agree to the treaty, then that means that it's sufficiently high to start applying at least part of the trade deal. And so you already apply it, even if not everyone has yet approved it. And then the agreement will fully come into place, into application, once everyone will have agreed. But today, like it's been, CETA was 2016, 2017, something like that. In 2022, some parliaments still have not ratified it. The French parliament has not ratified CETA because it's a politically toxic issue. It's not popular politically. If as French Parliament you're saying, oh, I'm going to vote in favor of CETA because of all the controversy over it. But and because of this, there is now a reverse kind of movement, which is a bit what Ms. Rinzema was saying. Say, okay, instead of trying to put everything inside trade agreements and cover environment, cover trade, cover investment, cover regulation, etc., let's just focus back on trade, like the core thing the EU as a competence, because then that means that we're going back to a system where trade agreements only need the European Parliament and the Council to agree. So you don't have all the dramas with national and regional parliament potentially vetoing at the last moment a trade agreement. So there is now this counterbalance saying, okay, maybe we overreached. We need to go back to something more basic, because otherwise we're not going to do any trade agreement in the future. And you heard us. She was regretting the fact that since the new parliament was elected, so in 2019, there has only been like one trade agreement that has been approved, which is the trade agreement with New Zealand, and nothing else has been agreed. Like there's an investment deal with China that was pushed through by the Germans, and that is now deep in the freezers since the China sanctions on MEPs and all that, because of what's happening in Xinjiang with the Uyghur. You have the discussion with Mercosur, where there is a lot of uncertainty. There was an agreement on paper, but then it was again put in the freezer because of problem with Bolsonaro, the former president of Brazil, and a lot of controversy of there. So now we're trying to see, okay, are we going to relaunch the thing with Lula being now president? So a lot of uncertainty in there. What else do I have on trade? Of course, I'm rambling, but if you have a question on trade, or you want me to talk about something completely different, do use the chat. It's for there. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep like going through my list. We talked about like a bit of different views on trade, like because she's from. Can China actually sanction Lithuania? Okay, so on this, just to give you context, so Lithuania, I think it was last year, something like that, did something that was a red line for China. Lithuania, so Baltic state in the European Union, opened an office for relationship with Taiwan. And China got extremely pissed off at this. Why? Because of what is called the One China policy. The One China policy is the idea that this is the policy pushed by China, which is the idea, okay, you only have one China. There is no China and Taiwan, there is one China. That's it. So China and Taiwan are one and the same country. There is a lot of discussion on the One China policy, the One China principle, and all that, on the interpretation on whether who has dominion over who. But the Chinese interpretation of it is there is one China, Taiwan is part of China, and of course that means that Taiwan belongs to the Beijing government, let's say. The One China principle is to say, okay, there is China and Taiwan. It's supposed to be one country, just when there is a disagreement about who is actually the legitimate government. But we're not contesting the fact that there is one China for one very simple reason, is because if you say that you don't agree to the One China principle, you can't have diplomatic relationship with China. So why do I tell you this? So you understand that under this idea, there is no Taiwan and China. There's only China. And so you can't say that Taiwan is an independent country. And to this day, Taiwan is only recognized officially and fully as an independent country by 13, I think, countries in the world. And that's it. No other country recognizes Taiwan. But you're going to say, well, but we have a relationship with Taiwan where we're exchanging microchips, we're having trade and all that. We recognize Taiwan, we work with Taiwan. It's true. But no country calls Taiwan a state. And so there is in no country in the EU and in most countries around the world, there is no embassy of Taiwan. you will have a representation office of Taipei. Taipei is the name of the capital of Taiwan. But what Lithuania did is that they opened an office, a representation office of Taiwan, not Taipei. What does it matter? Because then China said, wait, if you call this representation office Taiwan, that means that you're recognizing Taiwan as being an independent country, which means you are going against the One China principle, and so we're going to screw you over. And so what happened after that is that China effectively tried to blackmail Lithuania. It created it implemented sanctions against Lithuania, economic sanctions against Lithuania, de facto trying to bar Lithuanian products from entering the Chinese market. And it tried to push the EU to intervene against Lithuania by saying, oh, well, if you don't intervene against Lithuania, oh, you have a German car. Well, if you have a German car as a part from Lithuania, well, we'll have to stop the car. You can't sell your German car in China if there is a German part. That would be too bad. So, but maybe if you convince Lithuania to be more on our line, well, maybe you can get things going. So, in a way, trying to isolate Lithuania from the rest of the EU, basically trying to push national economical interest against Lithuania. That did not work so far. The Europeans have been pretty stoic and supporting Lithuania, saying that the Chinese reaction was heavily an overreaction, and so far there is no. They're not relenting towards China, especially since relationship with China are already complicated because of the Chinese investment agreement, with the sanctions of China against a number of MEPs and all that. So for now, the Europeans are sticking with Lithuania. As to whether China can actually sanction Lithuania, well, it's a question then for the World Trade Organization. So I think Lithuania said that they would sue China at the WTO, which is a process that takes absolutely years and years and years. But then it's more of a political move more than anything. It's politics. There it's clearly politics, just like the sanctions of China against the EU are contested and all that. But yeah, it's China being China. What else was I saying? I was saying something potentially interesting before that. On the diverging views on trade. So the MEP, Catharina Rinzema, is from Renew Europe, so the centrist group in the European Parliament. So you have within this group, it's actually a bit of a bipolar kind of group, political, meaning that on the one end of the group you have what you could call the liberals, which the Dutch liberals belong to, which are more pro-trade, like liberals in the economic sense of things, and then you have more of a centrist line, like the French, like the Belgians, etc., who are more a bit more protectionist, a bit more in favor of state intervention, these sort of things. And also, it can also have an impact on when it comes to values and foreign affairs and all that. So you have within this same political group two different, let's say, brand of centrists and liberals. And sometimes, without saying that they clash, they have different interpretation of things. And on trade, it's one of them, because you have some who are very much pro-trade and others that are more skeptical towards trade, or at least trade or free trade or open trade as right now. And so that makes discussions and the need for compromise a bit not difficult, but a bit sensitive within the political group, because like when you're talking about trade, I'm French, so let's talk about the French. It's very difficult for French MEPs to say that, oh yeah, of course we're going to be in favor of a lot of trade agreements, of Mercosur, even if the farmers are pissed off, even if the people are pissed off, etc., etc. So it's very politically difficult for them, and that push them to be less inclined to compromise, even if in the end they can find compromise on most things. But something to bear in mind that because of the different national sensibilities and interpretation of things, political groups within the European Parliament are not monolithical. It's not because you are part of Renew that everybody votes the same thing. Same thing for the EPP, same thing for the Socialists, same thing for the Greens. Although for the Greens on that, it's, I would say, something where all the Greens vote similarly. But yeah, you can have different tendencies and internal conflict within the group on different policy. What else do I have? Let's talk about something else than trade. Let's talk a bit about Sesame. So Sesame, how can I describe that? So this is this new proposal of regulation from the Commission, where the Commission allows judges to order messaging apps, online services, to actively seek and remove sexual abuse, content related to child sexual abuses. So pedopornography, the grooming, this sort of thing. Because until now, it's something that is being done voluntarily, meaning that it's companies, it's Apple, it's Facebook, etc., who voluntarily take measures to fight against these illegal content. And the Commission is saying, well, actually, even if they're doing things voluntarily, it's not good enough. It's not providing it's not doing as well as it should be. So we're doing a legal intervention, allowing judges to order these companies to take down sexual abusive content. So mostly we're talking about content that is already known. So you have a list of proven pedopornographic content, and so a judge can order company, okay, you have to make sure that on your services these pictures, these videos cannot find their ways on your services because it's proven as illegal. And it created all very intense fight because, like we discussed, it puts on the one end and against each other two contradicting interests. You have on the one end the child rights activists, so people who are very much in favor of fighting against child sexual abuse, and so they're very much in support of this regulation because for them it's okay, that finally these companies will have a duty to take down this content and we will and to act. On the other end, you have more privacy or civil online rights kind of NGOs who say no, it's terrible this regulation because it's under the guise of protecting children's rights and all that. It's actually weakening end-to-end encryption, and if we weaken that, then it's going to be exploited by by criminals, by governments to spy on people. What about sexting? Maybe he's going to he's going to delete content that is not illegal, actually. This kind of thing. And so you have privacy interest versus child protection interest, and it makes for very difficult discussions. There's been like a couple of years now that these discussions have been going on, and it's pretty intense. Like those who are on the privacy side of the debate, they call this regulation the chat control regulation, because they say, companies and people will look into your private conversation. They're going to look in your WhatsApp. They're going to look in your Messenger and look on whether you're sharing images that are not supposed to be there, potentially doing mistakes, etc., etc. And they're saying, but of course we want to defend the children's right, but it's not the right way. We should we can't push for technological solution. We can only invest into police enforcement. So give cops the money they need to do investigation and act against child pornography, but we can't have a technological approach to things. That's in a nutshell the debate. And so she's going to have an important role in that, Catharina Rinzema, because she's what is called a shadow rapporteur. So what is a shadow rapporteur? First, what is a rapporteur? A rapporteur in the European Parliament is the main guy in charge of a file. When you have a directive, a regulation that arrives in the Parliament, you will have one MEP who will be the lead negotiator, the guy in charge of the whole file. So it's going to be, I don't know, I'm thinking about Charles Goerens. So let's say Charles Goerens is nominated as the point guy in the Parliament who will be responsible for the entire file. So Charles Goerens comes from, actually it's a bad example because Goerens comes from Renew. Give me a name of the MEP. I don't know. Manfred Weber. He's not going to take that, but let's say Manfred Weber is nominated rapporteur. Is from the EPP, so from the Conservative. That doesn't mean that Manfred Weber, being rapporteur, can do whatever he wants on the file and nobody can stop him. No, he is the main guy, but around him he will have what is called shadow rapporteur, and shadow rapporteur are other MEPs from the other political groups who are appointed, nominated by the political groups to represent the views of the group towards the rapporteur and influence the discussion. Meaning that even if Manfred Weber would be the main guy, he's the lead negotiator, he has to discuss and negotiate with Catharina Rinzema, who is the shadow rapporteur for Renew, so the one person representing the views of the centrists in there. He would have to discuss with the socialists, with the Greens, with the left, with the far right shadow, etc., etc. And so ultimately, that creates this group of people who are the point people, the specialist people on this one file. Meaning that even if at the end you have the 705 MEPs who vote on the directive, on the regulation, actually most of the work, the people that really matter, will be this group of 10 people, more or less, who are the rapporteur and the shadow rapporteur, because they are the ones who are responsible for the file, who are the specialists of the file for their respective committees and respective political groups. In a very simplified way. So, as shadow rapporteur on the Sesame regulation, so the sexual abuse and all that, she will be the person for Renew Europe working and being specialized on that file. So she has to become an expert on the file, and she will not fully defined, but she will have a very strong influence on how the file will evolve in the future, because then the other need coalitions to around the regulation to ultimately it's having it adopted by the parliament. Switching to a different topic, very briefly, UK. We talked about the UK and the so-called Swiss-like kind of relationship. I didn't explain that during the stream because I wanted to save time, so I'm doing it right now. What is a Swiss-style relationship? If you don't know, Switzerland is not part of the European Union. They're not part of the EU. They don't want to be part of the EU. That's fine. Still, Switzerland, being like literally in the middle of the European Union, has a lot of relationship with the EU. And so the way that it works, and that's a so-called Swiss-style relationship, is that Switzerland have a lot of bilateral agreements with the EU. I think it's about 120 separate agreements between the EU and Switzerland. So you have an agreement on research, an agreement on freedom of circulation, one agreement on on tourism. So every single topic of relationship between the EU and Switzerland has a specific agreement that deals only with this topic, meaning that you have in the end 120 different deals between the EU and Switzerland. The other style of thing is what initially is now the UK kind of approach. It's a unified treaty, meaning that you have one single, instead of 120 different treaties, you only have one that covers pretty much everything, that allows to centralize all the topics and have an easier overview of everything. It's easier to manage. Of course, it means that you can have easier trade-off, because it's in a single file. You can say, okay, I'm giving up on research, but in exchange you will give up a bit on on agriculture and this kind of thing. So first thing, Swiss style, lots of bilateral agreements. UK current style is a single agreement. The second thing that is particular to the Swiss model is that, like I mentioned, there is a lot of agreement. There's a lot of relationship between the EU and Switzerland. And one consequence of that is that since Switzerland has an access to the single market, so they can export their Swiss products to the European market, they have to follow, to an extent, European law, meaning that European law indirectly applies in Switzerland because they have to respect European law if they want to have access to the European markets, which is normal. If you don't have any kind of barrier between the Swiss and the European markets, you have to make sure that the Swiss products respect EU law. So indirectly, that means that the Swiss have to apply or need to have compatible legislation with the EU legislation. That also means that you have to respect the so-called four freedom, which is freedom of capital, freedom of goods, freedom of persons, and I'm forgetting the final service, goods, persons. Shit. I'm forgetting the fourth one. Sorry about that. So it's called the fourth freedom, but the most important one is the freedom of circulation, the freedom of movement of people. And as it happens, probably know that Brexit was done not really because they liked freedom of circulation, rather the opposite. They hate freedom of circulation. They don't want people to come in the UK without their say so. And the cornerstone to any Swiss-like agreement or any kind of thing that allows you to have an access to the European market is that you need to respect freedom of circulation. The UK during the Brexit negotiation tried time and time again say we don't want freedom of circulation. Let's just do something about trade, about market access, but we don't want freedom of circulation. The EU always said no. It's a package. It's a package deal. Either you have freedom of circulation for everything, or you don't have any. And so you can't have access to things. And if you have access to European markets, you need to respect as well the EU regulation, even if you don't have a seat at the table to decide what's in the regulation. Which is a bit of the paradox of the UK, that they made Brexit on the idea that they would become free to be able to make their own legislation and all that. But if they go to a Swiss-like kind of relationship, they would actually have less power over European legislation, because legislation would be done in the EU without the UK giving input, and indirectly applied in the UK because they need to have something compatible with the EU so that they can export and have trade with that. So that's a bit the idea of what is the Swiss model, which again, just to finish on that, is a model that is also pretty criticized on the EU side, because like I said, something that the EU does not like about the Swiss thing is that it's 120 different bilateral texts, which means that it's an absolute bitch to manage and to follow. And also it means that there's always tensions between the Swiss and the Europeans on legislation, on freedom of circulation and all that. So it's a complete nightmare. And for years, actually, the EU has been trying to reduce the number of agreements between the EU and Switzerland, not in the sense of cancelling agreements, but merging them ultimately into a single treaty, so that everything is centralized in a single or one or two, but in a limited amount of agreements, so that it's easier to manage for everyone. Negotiation has been extremely difficult for many different reasons, because of question of freedom of not expression, freedom of movement, about budget and all that. So it's an ongoing topic. But yeah, all that to say that the Swiss model is not something that is without controversy or without issue from the European perspective. But well, in any case, that's something that is just let's say a rumor at this stage, and there is rumor that the British government is supporting such an approach. The new prime minister in the UK is fighting back these rumors because it is seen as a betrayal of Brexit and all that. So let's say that then from there it's the usual Brexit UK politics kind of drama. So I mean, you have again Nigel Farage is saying, "Oh, if it's going, I'm going to come back in politics." So same old UK Brexit politics. What else do I have on my little thing? Something that she mentioned is that several times is that the UK and the Netherlands are good friends. And it's true because they are both liberal countries in the sense of economically liberal countries. And back when the UK was in the EU, the UK and the Netherlands were working very often together because they have the same understanding of the EU in the sense that they like the subsidiarity principle. They don't want overreach from the European Union. They want more trade. They want open markets and all that. So they were very compatible with each other. They also have an historic background between the two. So often the Netherlands was very happy to have the UK in the EU because the UK being one of the biggest country in the EU, it was easier. It made things easier for the Netherlands to push for its vision because it means that he had a big ally in the room. It wasn't the Netherlands stuck between France and Germany. You had, let's say, you had the UK serving as a third pole, a liberal pole on which Netherlands could rely. And so that's one of the reasons why the Dutch were pretty sad to see the UK depart because they were afraid that without the UK in the room, the liberal ideas would be pushed aside and everything would be led by the France and Germany without a third pole to balance things out. But still, they are still very close, and very recently, actually a few days ago, to show you how the UK and the Netherlands are very much allies and very much friends. The UK and the Netherlands just signed a deal between the two, bilateral deal, saying that if one of the two had energy shortages, the other would supply energy to the other. What does it mean? And it's mostly something to the benefit of the UK. If the UK is lacking this winter energy, and so there is blackouts, then under this agreement, Netherlands would provide energy, send gas, send whatever to the UK to allow the UK energy sector to function, so that there is no blackout in the UK. Why did they do that? Because they get along well, and because the UK and France have a bit distrustful relationship, and so the UK was not sure that if something was going wrong, France would agree to help on the energy side. That they would agree to help the UK, and so to secure themselves, say, okay, we're going to have this separate deal with the Netherlands just in case. That way, we don't depend of the goodwill of the French. They can't screw us up if we have a problem. So that shows a bit the state of distrust a bit between France and the UK. Even if things now I don't want to say that they are looking up, but it's not as bad as it was between when it was Liz Truss or Boris Johnson. Let's say it like that. There is a willingness from both sides to a bit restart the relationship between France and UK. But still, I mean, the historical relationship between France and the UK has always been complicated. So yeah, there is. Whatever happens, the UK will always feel more comfortable with the Netherlands than with France. And let's say final thing, we're talking about Dutch and the relationship between Dutch people and the EU. It's true that there is something that happened. Like I mentioned that because it's striking now in the current context. The Netherlands voted in 2016 against the association agreements between the EU and Ukraine. So what is an association agreement? An association agreement, it's a deal between the EU and the country outside of the EU to say, okay, we're going to increase our relationship with you. We're going to give you financial aid. We're going to give you facilitated access to European market, these kind of things. And it's often seen as, let's say, a prelude, a way towards accession. It's not having an association deal does not mean that automatically you will become a member of the European Union, but it's, let's say, one box that you have to tick de facto before entering the EU. It's one of the stages that will ultimately lead you to become a member of the European Union. And so in 2016, the EU concluded an association agreement with Ukraine in support of Ukraine, because you remember that in 2014 there was the Maidan Revolution, where you had people Ukrainian people occupying the Maidan place in Kyiv, literally dying under European flag and all that, because they wanted further relationship with the EU. Like the thing that triggered the Maidan Revolution is that there was already this negotiation for an association agreement between the EU and Ukraine, and the back then the guy was a Ukrainian president who was pro-Russian, cancelled the negotiation, said, no, I don't want an association deal with the EU anymore. We want to be closer to Russia. And that pissed people off, because they wanted to actually be closer to the Europeans. And so that's what triggered the Maidan Revolution, and that led to the ultimately to the war that we're seeing now in Ukraine, being invaded by Russia. But it all started from the question: what is the relationship of Ukraine with the EU in the future? And so, after the beginning of all this in 2014, 2015, the EU concluded this association agreement with Ukraine as a form of support, because already Ukraine was having problems with Russia. We knew that already. And of course, being things that an association agreement, it required approval from member states, and including through referendum. And so, in the Netherlands, the government decided to go through referendum, and the referendum was manipulated a bit indeed by the far right, who made it something about migration. They were saying, oh yeah, it's going to be Ukrainian migrants that are going to come in the Netherlands. We're going to have it's terrible. So vote against the deal. And again, also it was a protest against the government, etc., etc. So Dutch people voted against the association agreement in 2016, which was especially bad for the Dutch government, because right when this was happening, the Netherlands were holding the council presidency of the council presidency of the EU, meaning that right now you have the Czech presidency. So it's the Czech Republic who is, let's say, for 6 months leading the work inside the council. So the institution representing the member state, and so it sets a lot of political priority, etc. So it's an important thing for 6 months. And right when back then the Netherlands were having the presidency, so they were like one of the face of the EU and setting the priority for the political priorities for the EU, they get a slap right in the face by their own people who say, well, actually, we don't want that deal between the EU and Ukraine. So it created a bit of a mess. Ultimately, the Netherlands signed the association agreement. I think it delayed things by 2 years, and in 2018, the Netherlands, through Parliament, they didn't do a second referendum. They went through Parliament. They agreed to the association agreement, but it postponed everything for 2 years, which is again pretty odd to see in the current context, where now we are having discussion about the Ukraine. I mean, it's not even discussion anymore. Ukraine is officially a candidate country to join the European Union. So it makes the whole thing a bit absurd and counterintuitive when we look at things. What is it, like 6 years later. But yeah, I always thought that interesting. But there's indeed like a lot of things that change after the war in Ukraine, and that's something that she mentioned briefly, saying that there was a lot of geopolitical talk about geopolitical Europe, and it's true. Like there is really, politically speaking, in terms of ideas, before and after 24th February 2022. So before and after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, it adds a huge impact politically, and even now a lot of things are done with Ukraine in mind, saying like every policy is like, okay, does this have an impact with Ukraine, with the geopolitical independence and the geopolitical role of the EU, etc., etc. So it really adds a game changer kind of impact. And already this mandate had a lot of led to a lot of different change toward the geopolitical Europe, etc., etc. You have a lot of discussion about the geopolitical Europe, but also the strategic autonomy of the EU, which is an idea that was very much pushed by French President Emmanuel Macron, but that has become like something that you everywhere, like every single policy now is about the strategic independence of the strategic autonomy of the EU. So it has become like a huge part of European politics. And yeah, I think I covered my basics, the main topics. I don't know if you have other things that you want me to discuss, so I give you a minute while I drink again, and otherwise I will do my conclusion, if you don't have anything else that you want me to ramble about or give explanation or whatever. Hop là. Well, no comments apart of thanks. Well, I'm happy that you found it interesting. Welcome again, since it was your first time on the channel. Conclusion. So thanks for coming. I hope you find the interview interesting. As usual, if you thought it was great, it was good, interesting, follow the channel. Always welcome. You can follow me on my other social media. You have the links right now in the chat. You can follow me on Discord, on Twitter, on YouTube, on whatever, on Mastodon, since we have Emperor Sandwich who comes from Mastodon. I mean, Mastodon is bringing me people, so you know I'm pretty happy about that. I'm curious. Before you go, how you found me on Mastodon? How were you in the bubble? Apparently you have Nightbot that was mean to you. Let me see. Okay, it was an elephant. What was I saying? Yeah, how did you find me on Mastodon? I find that interesting because I'm still learning Mastodon. Were you already into the EU people kind of instance, or did it pop up from somewhere else? Because I'm on the specific EU policy server that has like all the EU people, but yeah, I don't know if you came from the EU social kind of server, or if you came from a different server, because like I'm still trying to understand how Mastodon works and how to get audience and all that, because I understand like it's very different from Twitter. You have to actually put the hashtags and all that. You're just on the normal Swedish server, interesting privacy news. Okay, so you come from the Swedish server. Okay, interesting. Well, okay, well, pretty happy that you found your way to us. Do recommend the channel to other people if you want. You can follow me on the other social media. If people really enjoy what they see, they can subscribe. You can toss a coin to your streamer. It's as you want, but it's always very much appreciated. Now, conclusion. Next time I see you is gonna be on Wednesday. Shit, I'm forgetting my own schedule. Give me a sec. It's all part of the plan. When do I see you next? On Wednesday. Wednesday evening, interview in French with a French MEP on the European region policy. So what is the policy of the region, the policy of the EU on regions? What does it do? What do we have a regional policy and all that? So it's going to be on Wednesday at 8 in French with the president of the EU, the committee in the parliament in charge of that. And then it's going to be on Sunday where we're going to have the news review in French at 6 and in English at 8 p.m. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And on this note, well, I hope you enjoyed, and I wish you all a very good evening, and I hope to see you later this week or at some other time. Have a good one, guys. See ya.